So, if you've been with us for these past couple of weeks, we have been doing a series on the evaluation of God's chosen leaders. And each week, we have been focusing on a certain person, a certain individual that God has chosen to administer, to lead His people in every phase that the Israelites have gone through. And we have been talking about Solomon and how he is the greatest, wisest king to ever live because of his humbleness to ask God in his time of need. We have been expecting events such as the beginning of his life and how it was purely God's favor that he got up to the throne. He went through people like Joab, he went through people like Absalom and Adonijah, and he was able to conquer all types of opposition that was trying to take him away from the throne because God has put him there for a reason. And we know that when we study Solomon's life, everything that goes on in his life is all because of God and His favor towards him. We also talked about David's sage advice that he gives to his son Solomon, how to suppress all the political and spiritual consequences that you might have for being a king. And that consists of the first phase of Solomon's life, and today we will be talking about the second phase of his life. The second phase of his life entails Solomon building the temple, building his palace, projects that took up to 15 years to build. And after the temple was dedicated, the Lord appears to the king and reaffirms the Davidic covenant. And the Lord warns Solomon and continues to emphasize that if you continue to follow my commands, if you continue to listen to my advice, you will prosper. But the minute you don't, you will suffer the consequences. So, we know that Solomon was chosen to build the temple. God told King David explicitly that because you are a man of war and because you had blood all over your hands, you shouldn't be building the temple of God, and that it should be passed down to your son, Solomon. Now, during this time, during Solomon's reign, God set it up in a place where Israelites were the king. They had the most amount of prominence. All the nations around them feared the Israelites, and they were the highest-ranking nation at that time. Though there was political, historical, and theological currents flowing around during this time, there's nothing that has more of an impact than the temple building stories. Solomon, by seeing his father, learns about the political value of centralizing Israel's religion from David. We know that when King David became king, one of the first things that he did was he wanted to bring the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem, the capital. And he was so happy when he did that he took out all his clothes and he danced in front of the presence of the Lord because he knew that God was the center and the position of Israel's success. This move that David did to move the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem solidified his position as Israel's military, religious, and government system, as the controller of all three aspects of his kingdom. We see that Solomon's decision to construct a permanent home for the Ark of the Covenant completed what his father, King David, had done. So this, at this time, was a perfect place, a perfect period of time to build the temple. During this time, Israel was able to subdue all their enemies, and they were living at mostly peace around the nations that was around Israel. They were able to subdue the traditional enemies, but David and Solomon made an alliance with Tyre, which was a nation that was one of the biggest contributors to the building of the temple. And because of this wisdom that God had given to Solomon, he was smart enough to take advantage of this period of peace and stability, this period of no one trying to disturb the welfare of Israel. And Solomon was wise enough to take this position and to take Tyre's help. Now, it is wrong of us to think that the temple of God would have been built if Solomon did not believe in God. It is wrong of us to think that Solomon could have built the temple without God's help. We know that the Davidic covenant came as a result of David's desire to build God a house. But God said that I will help you build a house through your son Solomon. But also in the spiritual symbolic sense, God tells David that he will create a lineage through him. That through King David the Messiah would come. And through his lineage, people would, and that his lineage would never be disturbed, it would never be ruptured in any way. We see that in 1 Chronicles chapter 22 and 28, King David actually puts aside some materials for the project. He puts aside some tools that the temple needed to be built. And he told Solomon what materials would be built and why you need certain tools to build certain things in the temple. So, it is not surprising that Solomon was chosen to continue the Davidic covenant and to build the temple that David also desired to build. But besides the covenant that God established with King David, Solomon not only built the temple for that reason, but he also built the temple because he genuinely wanted to rule his people. He genuinely wanted God to bless the Israelites. And he did that, and he displayed that earning by the way that he asked for wisdom when God came to him. He could have asked anything in the world. He could have asked for dominion over his enemies. He could have asked for wealth and beyond his imagination. But yet he asked God, I want the spirit of discernment. I want wisdom enough to lead your people. And because of that, God gave him that and so much more. We also know that during this time, Solomon also built other building projects during this era. We all know that he built his own palace, which took about 13 years to build. He also constructed a hall of justice inside of his own palace. And he also made a palace for his first wife that he married with an Egyptian wife as an act of armistice, as a way to keep peace between the two countries. So, during this time, before Solomon came into the picture, David and Hiram, king of Tyre, were actually good friends. They were good allies. And they both enjoyed good relationships with each other. So when David died, Hiram, he wanted to continue the alliance with Solomon, and he wanted to make sure that the terms were peaceful. Solomon sends back a reply and states his plan to build the temple. And he asks for cedar, which is a type of wood. He requests some laborers to build the temple. And he suggests payments for the favors that Hiram was about to give him. Before we go on with the story, we need to understand who Hiram, king of Tyre, was, and why exactly was he so willing to help Solomon in the first place. So, King Hiram, he ruled this place called Tyre. Tyre was a city, and it was the capital of Phoenicia for over 30 years. Tyre was actually a mainland base, and it was occupied also as an offshore island. So it was an island, which kept it invulnerable from siege. It kept it invulnerable from dominion from any enemies, especially when Alexander the Great during this time was trying to conquer, he couldn't, because water was all over this region. The place Tyre, it was a Mediterranean port, and it was able to establish an impressive shipping fleet. The fact is that Israel aided this country, this city, Tyre, to get rid of the Philistines, who were actually the second-ranking regional power in sea trade. So there's two people who had major dominion over the sea. It was the people of Tyre and the Philistines. And before this period, Israelites actually aided Tyre in making sure that the Philistines got away from the sea trade and took them away from their major place of commerce. So therefore, based on all of this, we can make the conclusion that Israel-Tyre relationship alliance was a natural, mutually beneficial result of Israel's newly won prominence. Because of Israel's dominion over all the lands at this time, they were able to create a monopoly with the city of Tyre. And because of that, because of Israel's exploiting of the control of land and Tyre's expertise in shipping, they both could cover both sides of the spectrum. They could both cover land and sea. So, above all these national common interests, Solomon and Hiram were actually very similar in the way that they dealt with certain things. They both were aggressive young kings. They both took advantage of the historical situation at that time, this period of peace and stability, and they both took advantage of it so that they could increase their country's welfare. They expanded their own capitals, and they built worship centers. And they also desired to keep their nations wealthy while maintaining neutrality, while maintaining peace and stability. One other historical fact that deserves mention is Israel's temple building stories were similar to that of other ancient organizations at that time. As we've already stated, Hiram himself built worship centers. Archaeologists chart how nations like Sumeria, Assyria, Babylon, and Canaanites constructed their temples and how they wrote about their projects, around how they were supposed to build certain things. Based on this, archaeologists have concluded that the thematic structure of biblical building stories match that of these civilizations. These civilizations who atheists or any type of non-believer do not argue who existed, the biblical stories actually match their structure, actually match their style of writing and how they built those certain structures, which attests to the accuracy and historical authenticity of biblical accounts. We can take this point and apply this to apologetics. This point, we can prove that the things in the Bible are true. And the things of the Bible happened in a way that it was able to reflect civilizations that were similar to them and basically prove that they existed. So Hiram, king of Tyre, was one of Solomon's biggest contributors. In 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 1 to 12, if you could open up your Bibles, we can read that passage to talk about how Hiram made his position with Solomon and what Solomon desired from Hiram. So starting from verse 1, when Hiram, king of Tyre, heard that Solomon had been anointed king to succeed his father David, he sent his envoys, which are messengers, to Solomon because he had always been on friendly terms with David. Solomon sent back his message to Hiram, "You know that because of the wars waged against my father David from all sides, he could not build the temple for the name of the Lord, his God, until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. But now the Lord my God has given me rest on every side, and there is no adversary or disaster. I intend therefore to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, as the Lord told my father David, when he said, Your son, whom I will put on the throne in your place, will build a temple for my name. So give orders that cedars of Lebanon be cut for me. My men will work with yours, and I will pay you for your men whatever wages you set. You know that we have no one so skilled in felling timber as the Syrians." When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was greatly pleased and said, "Praise be to the Lord today, for he has given David a wise son to rule over his great nation." So Hiram sent word to Solomon, "I have received the message you sent me, and will do all you want in providing the cedar and pine logs. My men will haul them down from Lebanon to the sea, and I will float them in rafts by sea to the place you specify. There I will separate them, and you can take them away, and you are to grant my wish by providing food for my royal household." In this way, Hiram kept Solomon supplied with all the cedar and pine logs he wanted, and Solomon gave Hiram 20,000 cores of wheat as food for his household, in addition to 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil. Solomon continued to do this for Hiram year after year. The Lord gave Solomon wisdom, just as he had promised him. There were peaceful relations between Hiram and Solomon, and two of them made a treaty. So based on this passage, we can see how Hiram and Solomon, they both try to make terms where they will mutually benefit one another, but in friendly terms as well. We see in verse 11 that Hiram sends messengers in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 11. It talks about how Hiram, he sends messengers to David in order to do the same thing, in order to keep a peaceful alliance. And he sent messengers to David along with cedar logs, carpenters, and stonemasons, and built his palace for David on good terms. This episode explains the friendly terms between Hiram and David, and they wanted to keep this mutually beneficial relationship with Solomon and himself. So, based on this, Solomon takes this opportunity seriously, and he seizes the chance for the city of Tyre to help him once as they helped his father, and maintain a relationship between the nations. Solomon's response to Hiram emphasized how God was able to make Solomon wise, and how he was able to maintain his international relationships in order to keep the peace and stability around him. So here, you can see the evidence of God's wisdom bestowed upon Solomon. Solomon, he was wise in his statecraft. He was wise in gaining international relationships. and he was wise in establishing peaceful conditions in the kingdom. The Lord has given Solomon judicial, administrative, intellectual, and political skills to rule the nation of Israel. Any one of these abilities, just having one, is impressive enough. But God has given Solomon every spectrum, every aspect of leadership so that he could rule Israel in a mighty way. This is just evidence of God's faithfulness toward Solomon and through the nation of Israel. The letter that Hiram sent himself is structured in a common ancient format that is composed in covenantal terms. We see how in that scripture, Solomon talks about how David could not build the temple because until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. When David was king, he constantly was at warfare. He was constantly having a belligerent nature. He was constantly trying to suppress the enemies that were around him. But he adds that the Lord, my God, has given me peace on every side. Which also alludes to the fact of Joshua as well. When Joshua went to the promised land, because of his faithfulness towards God, in every battle that he went through, he had victory. This one incident when he was facing the city of Ai, he went in, it was a smaller city compared to Jericho. So Joshua saw that this was going to be an easy victory. The Israelites went in, they went to fight, but for some reason the city of Ai was very prepared. For some reason, they had all the military, they had all the arrows, and it seemed as if they knew exactly what the Israelites were planning. So they were able to counteract their attacks, and Israel took a fatal blow. Joshua came back and he prayed, God, why? How is this small city able to take us over? And God reveals to him that there's a certain person in the camp that steals a treasure when God tells them not to, and hides it in the ground. And because of that, the guy is executed, and they keep on going forward. Solomon bases his desire to build on God's promises to David in 2 Samuel chapter 7, which removes any notion that Solomon was doing this just because God gave him blessings. We see here in this scripture that Solomon did this solely to fulfill the Davidic covenant. He did this solely to finish what his father started and what God has instigated for him. He did not do this because he was rich. He did not do this because he had dominion over all the nations, but he did this for God. Here, the return message basically agrees to Solomon's request of sending laborers to cut down the cedar trees of Lebanon and put them on a raft and float them onto the nation of Israel. But there are two alterations to Solomon's request that Hiram made in this passage. The number one is the men of Tyre and the men of Israelites were not to work together. They were not to work together on any sort of projects, any type of architectural buildings whatsoever. And number two, instead of Solomon paying wages for the workers that he is obtaining from the king of Tyre, Hiram asks that you feed my family. That you give me all the food and just feed my family for the rest of our days. And that's what they did. And because of that, both of them were at peace and the temple construction began. Number two, one of the biggest things that Solomon did when he was governing the building of the temple was he conscripted workers. Now, before we progress into this, we need to know what conscription actually means. Conscription means compulsory enlistment, or another way of saying it is forced employment. King Solomon, when he was building the temple, he conscripted laborers from all over Israel, about 30,000 men. He sent them off to Lebanon in shifts of 10,000 a month, so that they spent 1 month in Lebanon and 2 months at home. 1 month in Lebanon, 2 months at home. And they did this repetitively until the temple was made. Solomon had 70,000 carriers and 80,000 stone cutters in the hills, as well as 3,300 foremen who basically directed the major operations of the temple and supervised the projects. They were supposed to remove from the quarry large blocks of stone, of quality stone. Any sort of stone that had a crack, any sort of stone that had any sort of crevice whatsoever had to be removed. The craftsmen of Solomon and Hiram and the men of Gabel cut and prepared the timber and stone for the building of the temple. In order to have enough workers to complete the projects, in order to continue to have this continual supply of laborers, Solomon found it necessary to institute this unpopular practice of conscription. Conscription is not as popular today, but apparently it was back then in the ancient nations. The more splendid the royal court was, the more the demand was from the people. So how this plan was to work is because one month they had to work to their dying breath, and 2 months they went back home. It adds up that 4 months each worker had forced labor, and 8 months they had vacation. They had rest. They could be at home and relax with their family. So, on the other hand, foreign workers were permanently assigned to forced labor. And because of this practice that Solomon put in, because of the wisdom that he put in, he did not lose workers. And though it was back-breaking, tremendous, meticulous work that they had to do, all of them were willing to do it because they were conscripted. So now we go on to building the temple. So the building of the temple, the construction of the temple, happened exactly 480 years after Israelites came from Egypt. Before we proceed to the dimensions of the temple, we need to understand the biblical dimensions that Solomon puts, that are put in 1st and 2nd Kings. We all know, if you read the Bible, that all these measurements, all these dimensions are put in cubits. So it's best that we know what a cubit actually means in our terminology. So 1 cubit equals 1.5 feet, so 1.5 foot. So the temple that King Solomon built for the Lord was 60 cubits long, 20 wide, and 30 high. The portico, which was the large hallway filled with pillars, that had pillars on the left and right side, the huge hallway extended the width of the temple, which was 20 cubits long, and projected 10 cubits from the front of the temple. In 1 Kings chapter 6, 1 through 10, it talks about all the details that Solomon puts in building the layering of the temple. The temple was a portable shrine, and the temple was symbolic in the way that after all these years of being in the wilderness, the Israelites had to carry the tabernacle on their back, and God's presence was mobile. But now, the temple here is here to symbolize permanence. It's supposed to symbolize the fact that now, after all these years, God's presence could be in one place. After all these years, now the Israelites can worship and admire the glory of God in one place, in a place suited for our Lord and Savior, and for our God. So, with the temple, God's promises were emphasized. We see in 1 Kings chapter 6, 11 through 13 says, "The word of the Lord came to Solomon, as for this temple you are building, if you follow my decrees, carry out my regulations, and keep all my commands, and obey them, I will fulfill through you the promise I gave to David your father, and I will live among the Israelites and will not abandon my people Israel." We need to ask, why does God keep telling Solomon this over and over again? Why does he keep on reiterating the covenant that he made with David and Solomon? Because he wanted to understand the severity of the consequences. He wanted Solomon to understand that as long as you follow my decrees, all the prosperity in the world will come to you. But the minute you divert from me, the minute that you come away from the path and start feeding into your secular desires, consequences will come your way, and the nation of Israel will be disrupted. So, the next step is furnishing the temple. In the furnishing of the temple, in 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 14 to 13, it lists all the details that the Israelites had to do in furnishing to make sure that the temple was spotless, without blemish, and that they had to furnish the certain woods and materials to build the temple. There was a resting place for the Ark of the Covenant, and this was the place where the annual atonement of the nation's sins, where the high priest can come and atone for the sins of themselves, the sins of their friends, and the sins of the nation. 30 feet were set aside at the rear of the sanctuary for this special room. So the Ark of the Covenant actually occupied 1/3 of the space of the temple. overlaid with gold as well. 2 cherubim, each with 15 feet high, grace the most holy place. Cherubim is a type of angel. It's one of the archangels that the Bible talks about. So they had 15-foot statues of cherubim angels on both sides. One extreme wingtip to the other. The 2 carved pieces span the width of the room. Perhaps these figures are to symbolize the same angels that guarded the Garden of Eden after Adam and Eve were taken away. The other 60 feet of the sanctuary was overlaid with gold, carvings of cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, covered the walls and the inner doors. They wanted to make sure that they could beautify the temple as much as they could, and also create the amount of herbs that could maintain the heavenly aroma inside the building. So all of these intricacies, all of these things that the Israelites put in, shows us how much detail was needed for God to dwell in the sanctuary, how much details were needed to give God the utter praise. So, after all of this project, after everything that they did, it took about 7 years and 6 months to build the temple. Though it was not King Solomon's most ornate, most largest project, it is definitely the most important facility that Solomon ever built in his life. It stands for nearly 4 centuries, this temple, and it is the only structure that Solomon builds that the Israelites rebuild after they are held captive and they are released from their oppressors. So we go to the palace construction, which is King Solomon's home. All of these details are put in 1 Kings chapter 7, verses 1 through 12. He built a palace of the forest of Lebanon, which is 100 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high, with 4 rows of cedar columns supporting trimmed cedar beams. The foundations were laid with large stones of good quality, some measuring 10 cubits and some 8. Above were high-grade stones cut to size and cedar beams. Each one of these processes take a long time and requires meticulous work, which is one of the reasons why Solomon had to employ the conscription method. Solomon also made a palace for Pharaoh's daughter, the one that he married as a pact to keep relationships with Egypt and Israel mutual. The palace construction story shows us that Solomon's secular interest never ceased, and it kind of foreshadows the fact what happens next in Solomon's life and how he deviates from the path of the Lord. Because of his sexual interest and because of him trying to satisfy the desires of his wives and concubines, the palace nearly took twice as long to finish. And it was much larger and costlier than the original budget. So Solomon's palace complex consisted of 5 parts. The first part was the palace of the forest of Lebanon, which we talked about, which was a hall that was about 100 cubits long. There was a hall of pillars, which was a big hallway of pillars on all different sides, spreading apart the entire palace. He made a hall of justice, a place where he could administer justice, especially we talked about how he took the case of the prostitutes, and because of his wisdom that God had given him, he was able to figure out who the real mother was. And there were maybe hundreds and thousands of cases at this time, after people seeing how Solomon administered justice and how God was intervening in his daily ways. So he set up a hall of justice where he could be the judge and administer court cases that would come about. The 4th one is the palace for himself, and the 5th one was the palace for Pharaoh's daughter. So all of these connected buildings provided living quarters for the royal family. Fine stone and wood are used in these structures, and we can tell obviously that Solomon built one of the biggest and greatest homes to ever build in the ancient world. We see all of Solomon's architectural designs, but when we see these dimensions, we see that they put cedar wood in everything that they do, whether it be the pillars, whether it be the roof, or whether it be the floor. So now we need to ask the question, why cedar wood? Why did the Israelites use cedar wood at this time? So apparently Solomon was actually a botanist. If you do not know what a botanist is, it's basically an expert in plant life. So he knew exactly what herbs to use for the temple. He knew exactly what type of wood would be beneficial for the temple. Cedar wood back then was actually used to construct a lot of major buildings back then in the ancient civilizations. Cedar wood was durable, it was free of knots, and it was easy to work with. It also had a really good color to it. Cedar wood was warm red and beautifully grained, which gave a really nice tone to the temple. Cedars exuded gum or balsam, which gives the tree a aromatic scent in which people take delight. Not only is it durable, but it also gives a pleasant scent when you walk to the building. And another benefit of that is that most insects dislike the smell and taste, which we see all the details in 1 Kings chapter 7, verse 13 to 51. In order to furnish the temple properly, Solomon had to go back to Hiram, king of Tyre, for more help, because he needed someone who was an expert in this field. He secures Hiram, a workman of mixed Israelite and Tyrian descent. So, if you are wondering, this Hiram is actually the same king who gave the supplies to Solomon. So, not only is he king, but he's also expert in the knowledge of bronze, and he is filled with wisdom and understanding when it comes to building the architectural designs. Hiram fashions 4 basic items and accessories for Solomon. First, he creates 2 bronze pillars, which he sets as bowl-shaped capitals, interwoven chains that fix the capitals on the pillars, and pomegranates to help decorate the place on top of the pillars. These pillars are to symbolize the strength and stability of the kingdom of God at that time. It was supposed to symbolize the fact that because of God's providence in Solomon's life, any sort of obstruction around him was diminished, and they were able to live at peace. They were also to symbolize the presence and permanence of Yahweh and the king. The pillars were to symbolize the stability that now God's presence was at hand, and now God's presence could be at one place and be stable, where the people of Israel could enjoy his presence. Hiram also fashions a large holding tank called the sea. They had this tank in the temple, and it was round in shape, and it was lit at the top. This basin could hold up to 11,500 gallons of water. Despite the sea being 7 feet high, according to 2 Chronicles chapter 4, verse 6, it states that this large holding tank, the sea, was used for bathing for the priests. And when the priests went into the temple to make their sacrifices, make their atonement for the people, they would bathe in this place called the sea. They could cleanse themselves before and after performing their duties. On the front of the seas were girded 12 bowls. Hiram's third project was to make 10 movable stands to hold basins of water needed for various temple rituals. Bulls, cherubim, and lions appeared on the carved side panels. Each of the stands had 4 wheels, so it was mobile, so you could bring it with you wherever you could, whatever duty that you had to go through. The top of the stand was decorated with cherubim, lions, and palm trees. 10 bronze basins, which were mobile, were able to hold 230 gallons of water each, and 5 of them were used on the north side of the temple, and 5 of them were used on the south side of the temple. Along with the sea, these vessels held sufficient water for priestly cleansing, the ritual washing for animal sacrifices, burnt offerings, and the removal of blood and refuse from the area. Fourth and finally, Hiram made small basins, as well as shovels with sprinkling bowls. So Solomon completes the temple furnishings by having its internal utensils made. Most of these items correspond to virtually identical furnishings in the temple. One of them is the golden altar. The golden altar where the Ark of the Covenant was placed, all of it was put in gold, was rested in the most holy place. The golden table, which had the bread of presence. Apparently, just how we have communion in today's day and age, we have the communion where we eat and we remember the body that Jesus Christ has sacrificed for us. back then, they actually had a bread where if you ate it, it would symbolize the fact that you were dwelling in the presence of God. It represents God's presence. 10 lampstands were fashioned in locations to maximize light. Obviously, they didn't have electricity back then, so they made 10 lampstands that were mobile as well, so that they can move around and make sure that the light is able to maximize the total surface area of the building. Basins, wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers were made for various rituals for the temple. And the rest of the items that David pre-made for Solomon before he became king was put into the temple's treasury by Solomon. So, based on all of this, based on all the details we know about the temple, we can conclude that the building of the temple was one of the most critical building designs that Israel has ever made. It gave Israel a sense of a home. The temple gave Israelites a hope that after all these years of oppression and slavery, that now we could reside as a nation in peace and be unified in God's presence. The temple also symbolized hope that for the near future that they would be able to enjoy His presence and be able to worship Him in one place. So, as we have been doing in this series, we have been analyzing God's sovereignty and His leaders, and how His grace and mercy led them to be blessed and do great things to give Him glory. We clearly see in every aspect of Solomon's life, up until now, that everything has been driven by God's grace, it has been driven by God's mercy and His protection. And through God's intervention, He was able to fulfill His end of the Davidic covenant as well. But obviously, as we talked about that scripture, that He makes Himself clear with Solomon that as long as you adhere to my words and obey His commands, all the prosperity in the world will be given to him. But the minute he doesn't, we all know the story, what happens. For us especially, when it comes to sin, sometimes when we are Christians, we have this false misconception that we are able to sin and God is okay with it. We are able to sin and God is just going to wash it away. He's not going to care. He's just going to forget about it and move on. But we need to understand how bad it is to sin. And though you are a Christian, every time you sin, it hurts God. It makes God mourn in every way. So, just like here in Solomon, as long as he adhered to the commands, as long as he adhered to the covenant that God had given him, he was fine. But the minute that he took his focus away from God, God took away his kingdom. And because of that, God split up into the northern and southern kingdoms that we will soon talk about next. But it is the same in our lives. When we are promised prosperity, whatever it may be, whatever blessing that God has given us, never lose your focus from the one who gave it to you. Because in the song that we sing, "Blessed be your name," in the bridge it talks about you give and take away, you give and take away. And that is completely true. God has the ability to give you the blessings, give you the chance to enjoy life in His presence. But He also has the ability to give it away and take it away from you. He also has the ability to take away your blessings if you do not follow His commands and do not live in His word. So let us take this story of Solomon. Let us understand that with all the complexity, with all the glory that the temple was built, and all the palaces and whatnot, and how much Solomon was loving his life, everything is worth nothing, as he talks about in Lamentations. All these treasures in this world, everything that you may think is valuable, everything that you might think, whether it be the best car, the best phone, the best clothes, whatever it may be, are all worth nothing. We talk about in Matthew that Matthew talks about store up your treasures in heaven, treasures that moths and robbers cannot steal, where moths cannot rust, and live in the fact that we have eternal life through Jesus Christ, and it is a treasure that will always be eternal and will always be with us. So let us remember that, let us ponder that over this week, and understand that God's love is something we cannot fathom. The fact that we are breathing right now, the fact that we are sitting here, living in His presence, hearing His word, is already too much of a blessing. The fact that He has given us jobs, He's given us cars, He has given us all the facilities that we need is already too much. And the fact that He has given His Son to die for us, wretched people that we are, who have fallen against Him many, many times, and yet He decides to love us unconditionally. So as we sing this, as we go out this week, let us remember to give Him glory, give Him honor, and enjoy life to the fullest through His name and through His power. And may God bless this word.
Praise the Lord. My voice was totally bad last few days, and I thought I would recover. I didn't tell anyone, Tony, anything until yesterday afternoon. I felt like it's going to be bad, so I told him, this is my situation, you're able to step up. And so he started, and it's a very difficult message because of a lot of details, but I do know that he has that good understanding on this temple. Thank God that he was able to come up and able to do that. There are three phases in Solomon's life. So we finished phase 1 when I was explaining about how he became the king from King David, how the position was transferred to Solomon, and then how he subdued all the enemies and took over the control of the kingdom. So that's when he gave sacrifices, the God came to him and asked him, what do you want? And he asked for the wisdom. And then when God gave him not just the wisdom, but the riches and all that. So we looked at the phase 1, and which is phase 2 is when what Jonathan talked about is building the temple, building the palaces. And so his wealth and his architecture, all his wisdom as a botanist, and all that we see here, a lot of stuff is there, we minimized it. But the phase 3, what we look at this person who is so good in so worshipping God, he loved to build the temples. He did everything to God, because King David was supposed to do it, but Solomon came there, he did it. And now all the people were coming together to worship the God. So here, we'll see here from now to the third phase is how he, from that focus to God, how he slowly gets compromised. It's okay, it's only one mistake, it's no big deal. God still loves me. That kind of slowly he moves down, and the decline of his life will be in the phase 3. This is a real character, a person we need to study because he's someone who had everything in his life. But what person can also happen, when we look at the end of his life, we'll see that the impact the decisions will cause, not just to him, for generations. And so it's interesting if you missed those series before, it's on our website, just listen to that. It connects the whole thing in the Solomon life by listening, because there are many chapters, a lot of history we were reviewing it to get to this matter. We are studying a lot of books to get to the details of this history. So it helps to listen. That way you can get into your mind all history. Amen. So any prayer points, praise points, or prayer requests?